Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have Matthew Hatfield from Virginia Preps. He's the dean of Virginia social media sports. He's the one that got this whole thing started. Also ESPN Radio. Thanks for joining me, Matthew.
It's my pleasure, Julian, and you're too kind. I don't know if I'm the one that got it started. If I did, I'd love to have like some type of finder's. I don't know what they give you for that, but it's always a pleasure to be on with you and chat some sports. And it's that time of year. The football's be kicking off, and we'll rev into basketball, and the whole thing will get going.
I know, it's great. This is your time of year. Well, first of all, I've been watching some of the scrimmages on some of the links that you provided and others. It looks like the crowds are even out for scrimmages. It looks like people are starving for some local sports. Is that your impression?
No doubt. I think, since the pandemic it hasn't really completely concluded, but since it's sort of a lot of the situations have decreased as far as cases and all the different conflicts and issues we've had with everything, people have been looking forward to getting those packed arenas, packed gyms, packed football stadiums back again to where we have the old days, if you will, to a certain extent. And I know there are folks that have not liked some of the realignment changes. There's another shift coming, but hey, we've got sports, we've got people back, we've got spectators, which we didn't have a couple years ago, and it was funky then, and we appreciate it, I think, even more now that we're getting back to some normalcy.
Yeah, let's be thankful, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, in basketball we talk, and one of the common themes is obviously a lot of the private schools get the top players, especially in the DC area. I'm not sure how the rest of the state works, but what about football? When you look around the state, do the top recruits go play in private schools? My guess is not as much as basketball. And does it matter what part of the state you're talking about?
Some will tell you it does. I say it doesn't, because I'll tell you that college coaches will find a player, whether he plays for a 10-0 powerhouse that's in the state playoffs every year, if you're on a 2-8, 1-9 team. Case in point, Julian, we've got a list going up on Virginia Preps pretty soon here. I think it's 72. I'm not going to rattle off all 70 or 65 of them. FBS and FCS verbal commits as of the final Thursday of August 2022. I've been doing this since 2004. With Virginia Preps and on ESPN Radio and all the things I do with covering high school football. I've never seen that many verbal commits this time of the year. And I would say it's a little bit different than basketball. Some will go to private schools. We also see the reverse. We see some players leave private schools, like take, for example, one of Freedom High School's best players there in Woodbridge, TJ Bush. He left Bishop Ireton, who I just watched last Friday in a scrimmage against Kellum. He left Ireton to go to Freedom, the Coastal Carolina commit. So sometimes you see the opposite, where we're so used to some of these better public school players, particularly in Northern Virginia and pockets of the state, sometimes occasionally in Tidewater, Richmond, Southwest, Roanoke, in Virginia, they'll go to a private powerhouse, some of the bigger name schools, the Oak Hills, the Blue Ridges, the Miller schools, the fill in the WCAC schools like Paul VI, Bishop O'Connell. We see a little bit of the opposite sometimes in football, where you see some of those powers, and in Northern Virginia, we know who some of those teams are, like the Stone Bridges, the South Counties, and so on and so forth. They end up getting a player or two that transfer in.
Kind of like Avery Ford went back to Centerville from Paul VI. Yeah. He was a football commit. Yeah.
And remember, Tyler Scanlon, who was a two-sport standout at Westfield, went on to Boston University to play his hoops. He was at Paul VI, and he goes to Westfield, helps them win a state championship in football, then does it a few months later with Blake Francis, teaming up with him to help the Bulldogs beat Oscar Smith in the state basketball championship at VCU.
Yeah. Well, I know we'll talk about some of the great players when we talk about the teams, but since you mentioned it, who are some of the commits that you're excited about? Maybe some of the top 10 commits and where they're heading.
Well, there's a few. I know people have been wondering who the best player is in the state for this year. It's kind of an argument because, in all honesty, and I don't say this in a negative way about the players, in comparison to some recent years, we've had some mega 5-star players. Some go to like Ohio State or Alabama or Florida State. You fill in the blank. There's not a definite bona fide, what we would call a 5-star guy in this class of 2023 in Virginia. That being said, the top 2 guys we've got on Rivals in our state right now in our rankings. Number 2 is from your neck of the woods up there at Fairfax High School, Tony Rojas, linebacker, played some basketball as well, really dynamic player. Yeah, he's very good in both sports. And it's funny because Mike Barbary, the basketball coach, and some other basketball coaches were telling me when he was a sophomore, they said, watch out, he's going to be a big deal. And he got all those offers from Miami and Penn State, ended up picking the Nittany Lions in so many different places. And then the other one is from Nova as well, in Ashburn, Alex Birchmeyer, offensive lineman from Broad Run. And he's a player that I think some wondered, just how strong, how tough he is. Well, he's an all-state wrestler. He's really good in wrestling as well, in addition to his football exploits, and he's tested very well at Penn State. So a lot of people like that about him. His testing scores, they think that his footwork's really, really good. So he's been really, in a lot of people's eyes, the best prospect for the last year and a half, and he committed to Penn State in July of 2021, whereas Rojas did it this past July. Beyond that, there's some players outside of Northern Virginia. Northern Neck, the little small schools, Class 1, have 2 players that are dynamite athletes that could take their teams far. At Northumberland, the number 3 rated player is a kid named Cameron Selden, who's going to Tennessee. Julian, he had 9 touchdowns in 3 games in the abbreviated spring season. Keeping him healthy is going to be important, but Tennessee's excited about him. Can play either side of the football, wide receiver, defensive back. And then a kid at Essex High School in Tappahannock, Cameron Robinson, 6'2", 215 pounds. He's a very versatile, physical athlete in addition to his quicks. Probably going to play some linebackers for the Cavaliers of UVA. So those are some names to watch out for. And then in my neck of the woods in Tidewater, just had a commitment on Wednesday from Paul Billups. He's rated the number 1 player by the Pilot down here, as well as the rivals in the state for the Tidewater prospects. Wide receiver, defensive back. Could be a power struggle with some of the coaches there where to play him, because some coaches think he can be an NFL corner one day. And right now he's projected to play a wide receiver on the outside for Mac Brown on the Tar Heels. Of course, a local legend from our neck of the woods in Dre Bly, who won a Super Bowl with the Rams, played at UNC, was his lead recruiter, and they have cleaned up here in Virginia, especially in the 757 with Paul Billups. And to me, maybe as good, possibly even better than Billups and Tidewater is a young man at Maury High School named Peyton Jones, a running back. Duke is making a big push in Virginia, getting some players, especially from Tidewater. And Peyton Jones is a versatile running back who can catch passes, run the ball very, very well. And Zon Burden, the ace recruiter there, as he's gotten some players from Tidewater like Karan Boyd of Kempsville, David Anderson of Kickitan, a defensive lineman, and Leon Griffin, a very aggressive, physical defensive back, impressive-looking kid from Bayside High and Virginia Beach. So those are some of the names, but yeah, it's a long, long list. It would take us 2-3 hours to go through all of them at least, and we won't do all that, but some good ones still to watch out for.
Yeah. Well, just quick shout out to Daryl Hammond's family. Daryl went to Essex High School back in the 80s, started in UVA, I think at linebacker or in the defensive backfield. He passed away last year, but it's nice to hear that Essex has another big player and he's headed for UVA. That's good news. One of our frustrations, Matthew, with basketball is the 6 classifications, because last year at the state tournament we had John Marshall playing Class 2 ball. We had a very strong Cave Springs team in the 4th classification. You have all these really, really good teams up and down the classifications, and Woodgrove and the girls, even though they got upset after an injury, but you really don't know who's the best when the season's over. Do you have the same struggle in football? No, we've had 6 champions in football since 1985-86, so it's gone back. It's been this way for a long time. But is there the same frustration in football in that when the season's over, you still don't know who's best?
Yes and no. I think we'd love to have the tournament of champions where you pit them all against each other. Like last year we got Oscar Smith versus Stonebridge, let the 6 and 5 title winners duke it out right there on the field, or maybe the next day or a week later. Not going to happen. It's in Fantasy Island or Fantasy World. It's in 4 and 3 last year. You had Varina and Phoebus. That would have been a heck of a matchup, pitting the 804, one of the best against one of the very best in the 757. And the small schools, Riverheads has had this unbelievable run of dominance, Julian. I'm not sure how much you followed it, but 6 state titles, or unprecedented run of excellence. They've got a new coach, and Ray Norcross stepping in for Robert Casto, who retired. He actually has retired for a second time. He did it the first time and came back. It was sort of a Brett Favre retirement, if you will, but they're on the state's longest win streak with 60 victories in a row, which is just unfathomable. They're actually trying to tie. They get to 2 wins here to start. They'll tie Phoebus' streak from about a decade ago that was snapped by Woodside one Friday night there at Darling Stadium. And Lord Botetourt waits for them in Class 3, who's a very strong, big team that has a lot of hulking linemen that go on to the next level under Coach Jamie Harless, including a couple next year they'll have in DJ Tolliver and Kendall Howard. Just sent Gunnar Givens on to Virginia Tech, and Jesse Hansen a couple years back to the Hokies as well. So I think you get it more in basketball, though, because I know with my Virginia Preps Classic one year, John Marshall beat Lansdowne, the Class 6 champion, by double digits. And people were like, that they were Class 3 then, they're now Class 2. And I just watched John Marshall in a basketball off-season event here, Julian, last weekend at Bethel High School in Hampton, and they've got a freshman. I've been doing this, not to go into in-depth basketball, almost 20 years. best freshman I've probably ever seen live. He's 6'8". He can dunk everything. He can block everything. He's got probably double-digit D1 offers right now, and they're in Class 2, and they're going to obliterate the competition. And his teammate, Dennis Parker, who's probably the favorite for State Player of the Year, says to me candidly in an interview, yeah, he's probably going to be better than me, which made me pause, like, not to get on Dennis, but what made you say that? And it's like, well, he's already 6'8", I'm 6'7", and he can just do everything out there. So you get it more in basketball because the numbers aren't as large. It's 5-on-5. It's 12 players about on a team. In football, it's 11 on each side of the ball, and it's 40, 50 players. So the enrollment numbers matter more for football. The depth is important. I think it's cost a couple of teams more state championships. Lake Taylor down here in Norfolk has won 3 with a legendary coach and Hank Sawyer. If not for some injuries, you mentioned the injuries with Woodgrove girls, if not for an injury to his standout defensive back wide receiver Javon Harvey against Woodgrove that year, he probably wins that state championship, taking nothing from Woodgrove. And the same could be true for Phoebus that year when they lost to Heritage of Lynchburg. Great, well-schooled program, disciplined, hard-hitting under Brad Bradley. The Pioneers are in Lynchburg, but an injury cost them. So if you have an injury or two in football, in a weird way, it could be more devastating if that's a guy that goes 2 ways, 3 ways for some of the smaller schools in Class 4, Class 3, Class 2, Class 1. Basketball, you say it's devastating because the numbers are shorter, but football has more numbers. So I think the body of work, if you're at Class 6, Class 5 school and you've got 50, 60 guys like the Stonebridges, the Westfields, the Oscar Smiths, the Thomas Dales of the world, that's going to eventually, the attrition's going to matter.
Yeah. That sounds right on. Well, let's get to the previews now. Why don't we start with Class 6? They call it Division 6 or Class 6. It's Division 6.
Either way, I mean, people know. Our message boards are still labeled 6A, 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A. I had someone complain to me that you need to change it because that's regionally. I'm like, well, I still in the streets, Julian, I'll go to a game and they'll say, who's winning 4A? And I start talking about the region. Like, no, the Class 4, Division 4. So call it what you want. The VHSL wants us to call it, though, Class 6, 5, 4, 3,
right?
2,
Okay.
1. So, yeah, we'll make them happy. We love them. Let's call it that way, I guess. That's what I'll do, so.
Exactly. So they won't take us off the air. So
there you go.
Let's start with Class 6, Northern Virginia. Let's start with the Prince William and in the Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria schools. What are you seeing up in the northern part of the state?
I tell you, it's interesting because people feel like this is a year where Oscar Smith can be beaten because they graduated their quarterback, Ethan Vasco, to Kansas, the running back, Kevon King, to Norfolk State, 2 very integral multi-year starters on the line, and Martin Woodsma to Old Dominion and Caleb Jones to Navy. The question's sort of been, who is that Nova team, whether it's from Prince William or Fairfax or wherever it might be? People love Madison, and they should. I think Justin Kelt's done a wonderful job there. I'd caution people, the expectations are so high for them off back-to-back regional titles, beating South County in the state semis, which was a big triumph for them, and getting to that championship round against Oscar Smith last year. They graduated 29 seniors.
Wow.
And a lot of them were two-way guys or all-state, all-region kids that Alex Dredge at running back, this kid, that kid. So I feel like they are going to be in the hunt, but maybe towards the end, because their schedule out of the gate, Julian, is no cupcake. They got Stonebridge, reigning 2-time state champs in Class 5, and Lake Braddock, who's very prolific with a quarterback going to Delaware, and Daniel Lipovsky, some really good receivers from Coach Dock over there, Mike Doherty, and a defense that's not too shabby. So the Warhawks, who people are labeling as the second best team in the state, thinking that they're going to be unveiled as number 2 on our top 10 countdown, they might start out 0-2, and I wouldn't panic because Coach Counts will have them peaking probably down the stretch. Still, that Concord's tough, who they'll see. A couple teams I'd watch out for. I don't have them in my top 10. But Fairfax, I mentioned, I like what they're doing there with Tony Rojas leading the way on both sides of the ball. I think they have enough skill players and athletes, and I do feel like Region 6C is going to be a battle where you got South County and Lake Braddock, and last year we saw some teams emerge, the West Potomacs, the West Springfields in the hunt there, some good skill players at those spots there, and they can throw the football a little bit and put some points up on the board and be in some 35, 34 roller coaster type of games. And I do like, if I was to label some favorites from up north, I like Battlefield a lot. Caleb Woodson's going to Virginia Tech at safety. He's a really solid player. Ty Gordon on the line, and I like what Coach Craig Hatfield has done. Anybody with the last name of Hatfield, coach, knows what he's doing, right?
He's got to be great, yeah.
Got to be great. And he came from Eastern View, and he's had instant success there, getting into the state semifinals and a region championship over Freedom. And Freedom of Woodbridge has a bunch of athletes, Julian. They are really loaded at the skill spots for Coach Overton. They were underclass heavy there in Woodbridge last year. His nephew, Jeff Overton, at running back. Cam Courtney at receiver, new quarterback stepping in, but he's got some experience. And as I mentioned, the young man, TJ Bush on the defensive line coming in from Ireton, headed to Coastal Carolina. So watch out for them. Up in that Concord, though, my pick at top is Centerville. Whenever you have a 2,600-yard running back returning in Isaiah Ragland, who's going to Villanova, that's hard to beat. Plus, they have, in addition to Ragland, 2 other FBS, FCS Division I commits on their roster. When you look at Genton Vitzi, who's going to William & Mary, the defensive tackle, and then the kicker, Nathan Patterson, going to JMU. So if it comes down to a close game, his legs should be very, very influential to the outcome. So I like those teams. In a nutshell, I'd highlight Battlefield, Freedom, Centerville, Lake Braddock's very good. Keep an eye out for Fairfax, Madison, Westfield, West Potomac, West Springfield in the end. And then if you're looking for a dark horse that's not quite out of the Nova, but has been there before from the Fredericksburg, northwestern part of the state, Colonial Forge, this can be a year for them to be back with Nolan McConnell leading the way, the UNC commit on the line, and a newcomer at running back in Dante Hawthorne, a transfer from Massaponax, who's running the ball very, very good. But big games to watch out for. I'd watch out for those Concord games, the games involving Centerville, Madison, Centerville, Westfield, and I can't forget about Patriot when they see Battlefield end of the year. Coach Finnerty's got a really, really good group. Big B at receiver. They can run the ball well. They've got on the line a UVA commit in Cole Serber, so watch out for that game. So there's going to be some exciting games as we get to October and November up north.
Yeah. Well, let's go. For folks who don't know, Class 6 is, I guess the majority of the schools are Northern Virginia, and then the rest of the schools are spread out between the Hampton Roads and a few in Richmond. Mm-hmm. So let's preview the Class 6 schools in those areas.
In Hampton Roads and Richmond?
Yeah.
Sure. Oscar Smith is still the team to beat until proven otherwise. They're breaking in new quarterbacks and running backs there, but they have a really deep receiving core with Torrey Johnson, a West Virginia commit, Jamari Bam Knox, a shifty, speedy slot guy who's very small, but don't let that fool you. He can fly. And Xavier Lewis, who might end up having the best season of all three of them just because people focus so much on Johnson and Knox, and he can catch the football. And Chris Scott's defense is going to be up to snuff. I mean, they've got a bunch of players that are young, sophomores, juniors, even a couple freshmen that'll see the field at the defensive back spots that are still, creating their own path, if you will. Asad Brown at corners, a highly recruited player in the class of 2024. The only team I can see even giving them a battle in Division 6, probably in the Tidewater part of the state, is Western Branch, who has Billups, as we mentioned, Paul Billups going to UNC. Their quarterback returns in Taquan Trotman. Very solid returnees on defense for Coach Rashad Cook, and a great running back in Shamik Blizzard. When anytime you've got a guy running the ball named Blizzard, as we get colder towards November, December, you're in good shape. So they're one to watch out for. Thomas Dale's been very, very close the last couple of years. Question's going to be, can they be balanced enough on offense with Ethan Minter throwing the ball? He's a very good quarterback to complement that strong running game and then stay healthy defensively. If they do that, I think Kevin Tucker's team will be battling right there with Oscar Smith and Western Branch in Division 6 from that Region 6A part of the state.
All right, well, let's go to Division Class 5, right mm-hmm. there, the same Tidewater area, Hampton Roads area. I know they got some top Division 5 teams. So what do you predict for Division 5?
I'll actually tell you that I think Division 5 is deeper than Division 6 this year, at least from maybe teams 1 through 8. Once you get to 9 through 20, 6 might have the edge there. More teams that could jump into our top 10, but in Tidewater, it's Moray and Green Run, probably on a collision course again. Those two are just absolutely stacked with talent. Green Run's receiving core could very well be the best in the state with Keelan Brody Adams, Tayshawn Young, Steve, Dyshawn Newby, a couple of newcomers at receiver for them as well, including Jaden Anderson, the Princess Anne transfer. And they got a new quarterback that came in from Menchfield to replace Xavier Davis. Xavier Davis threw for 47 touchdowns last year, Julian, now at Emory and Henry. And this Kevin White kid from Menchfield, some feel he's going to be better than Xavier Davis. And with the weapons around him, I'm not going to argue that his numbers won't mimic or certainly even eclipse what Davis accomplished. Running the ball and stopping a run is going to be key for Green Run because in their 35-7 loss to Maury, Peyton Jones ran all over them in the cold in early December. And speaking of stopping a run, their first game out of the gate for Green Run is against Kempsville, a place I once roamed the halls. And as my radio partner, Coach Young, likes to say, lunch was my favorite subject. But Kempsville had the state's Yeah, he says it all the time. Ed Young, shout out to him. But Kempsville had the state's longest losing streak at 63. Darrell Cherry came in. They snapped it a few years ago against Bayside in a shocker. Last year got their first playoff win, I think, since 1994. And now they're primed to try to give Green Run a run for their money and possibly get to the state playoffs this year, led by Naquan Washington Pierce. He's a bruising running back. Think Jerome Bettis. His nickname is the Bus. He's built like that, sort of an old throwback fullback type to go with Karan Boyd, the Duke commit, who will play some receiver, some running back. Noah Lee, their quarterback, returns. Their offensive linemen are big. They're nicknamed the Trench Mob. And defensively, if they're able to replace Jalen White, who's at Old Dominion, and Eli Munden, who's at Emory and Henry, the two best pass rushers, and create pressure and push the pocket, collapse the pocket against a team like Green Run come playoff time, then this could be the year that Kempsville sort of opens more eyes and goes further to that state semifinal round. So those are the ones to watch out for. And obviously in Richmond, Highland Springs. I mean, they probably got multiple Division I guys at just about every position on the field, led by Coach Lauren Johnson's son, Braylon Johnson, a defensive back who's headed to Virginia Tech. They've also got Taki Heath, who's going to Virginia Tech. They're just stacked with talent. Miles Green's going to UVA at defensive end. And there's sophomores and juniors. They're so good, Julian, that they were playing a 7-on-7 at Old Dominion. They had their JV guys there. 16-team tournament, some of the best teams in the state. And they got like the number 1 seed for the tournament. And one of the assistant coaches for one of the Tidewater schools comes up to me and says, "That's their JV kids. They're that good?" And I was like, yeah, that's their JV kids. They're that good.
How important is 7-on-7 to development and to how you do it in the regular season?
I'd say it's like, in some ways, it's almost like AAU basketball with evaluations. It's a third of what you say. You can see what some kids do in one-on-one individual matchups, but when it all comes down to it, football's played with helmets and pads and tackling, so it's not, to me, the full picture. You can see some, but I always remind myself you're watching a 7-on-7. This is not full football. So it's like when you look at AAU basketball in a sense of you're going to see some individual play. It might not always be the same connectivity for team play. It's not entirely the way I would basically give you the full evaluation of a player or how a team is, because offensive linemen and defensive linemen aren't out there. So you're just seeing the skill guys and throwing the football. You're not seeing running the football either.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Northern Virginia to Loudoun County for Division V. I know Stonebridge is a perennial favorite and often champ. What's your predictions for Northern Virginia?
I think Stonebridge is going to be right there again. Mickey Thompson's got an excellent group. His defense could be better than last year's defense. Wide receiver Zeke Wimbush is just a fascinating football player. I mean, his game-winning touchdown catch against Maury was spectacular from Jacob Thomas. Now Jacob's gone at JMU, so Mario Suarez steps in at quarterback. Got a chance to catch up with Zeke on Zoom a while back, and I think he still got a chip on his shoulder, as he should. He's committed to Charlotte. He didn't get any accolades for all region and all state, Julian, and it's just baffling to me that he didn't. So I think he's out to prove that he is one of the best wide receiver, tight end, flex out, catch the football guys at 6'3", 215 pounds. Their offensive line should be solid with Alex Musselman leading the way and TJ Carrilla. They do what they do. Mickey Thompson's got it all figured out. I wonder, though, who's going to be the team up there that challenges them. For years, they had those great battles with Broad Run and Tuscarora, two schools that are in Division IV now that underwent coaching changes in the offseason here. But up north, I don't know that anybody really stays with them. I think come playoff time, we're looking at maybe Riverbend. They're chock full of talent with Mark Anthony Parker at linebacker, a scholarship kid, Matthias Mega Barnwell at tight end, who's going to Penn State. I mean, his nickname Mega because he's just massive, Julian. He's just unbelievably big, and he catches the football. So they're good, but again, Stonebridge, sometimes you're good is not good enough to beat them, because last year in the playoffs, Stonebridge ran into Riverbend, or Riverbend ran into Stonebridge, I should say, and it was 58-3. And Mountain View's got a great team. Lou Sorrentino's a Hall of Fame coach. Ike Daniels, the running back, is going to Syracuse. He picked them over Hawaii. Their quarterback, Jackson Sidler's back, top passer in Fredericksburg. They've got a linebacker who might be the best prospect in the entire 2024 class next year, with Christopher Jones, who's got offers from Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Georgia, you name them. They lost to Stonebridge 37-0 in the regional championship. So if I'm telling you Stonebridge's defense is better, potentially, even if there's a little bit of a drop-off losing Jacob Thomas's unbelievable clutch gene that he had, it's hard to see a Mountain View, a Riverbend, even a Patrick Henry or Roanoke, who's got a lot of speed and athleticism on the edges, to go into Stonebridge, where you probably have to go in and beat them. You got to do it for a full four quarters, 48 minutes, and very few teams have done that in recent years.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be exciting again, but let's go to Division 4. My guess is probably Varina is going to be tough again, and the Richmond teams will probably do well in Division 4. But what are your predictions for Division 4?
Yeah, Varina's stacked with talent again. They've got two very capable quarterbacks. Their starter, Miles Derricott's back. Kavion Keys, who just picked up an offer this week from Texas A&M's got a slew of offers. He's a wide receiver, linebacker, all-state kid, both sides of the ball. His list features Penn State, UNC, Texas A&M, and a bunch of others, and they're just chock full of talent. Added a couple transfers that will make them even better. And one of the first things Marcus Lewis talks about is his line. All these coaches talk about their line play because if you can win the battle up front in the trenches, you're going to be in great shape. Now, they've got an interesting opener to start with Hopewell out of Class 3, but I think Varina is the team to beat. Watch Dinwiddie live in their tri-scrimmage against Oscar Smith and Green Run, two Tidewater teams we touched on from Class 6 and Class 5 respectively, and Dinwiddie had an unbeaten regular season. Billy Mills' team is always disciplined, and talk about doing what you do well like Mickey Thompson does at Stonebridge. Dinwiddie will do what they do and do it well. They screen you to death. They run the football effectively. They're balanced, and then they fly to the football collectively with 11 hats on defense, which they'll do again this year. Their quarterback is Harry Dalton, who was a freshman 1,000-yard type of runner at running back. So he's going to be a dangerous runner, elusive when he gets in the open field behind a massive O-line led by Colin Jackson. So I like Dinwiddie to be Varina's top challenger. Out of Division 4, up north, it's very wide open. As I mentioned, Tuscarora, coaching change here late. Broad Run, coaching change in the offseason. Coach Griffiths retired. Stud quarterback from Broad Run and Griffiths now at Wake Forest. Stud running back from Tuscarora, Bryce Duke now at Virginia Tech. Watch out for maybe a Kettle Run. If you're looking for a surprise team nobody's talking about, they could be the one. They're not in our top 10, but I gave them a hard look at it. And Jordan Tapscott, wide receiver, defensive back, headed to VMI. They could be a sleeper team out of 4C, but 4 is pretty deep in 4D and 4B. I mentioned about Dinwiddie and Varina, the Richmond schools. Patrick Henry at Ashland is very good out of 4B as well under Coach Ken Wakefield. King George has two highly recruited receivers in Mekhi White and Chance Wiggins from the class of 2024, and the Foxes, they are no slouch. And 4D, you got to always watch out for Salem out there in the western part of the state. They are full of some track speedsters and running backs that can go the distance in a blink of an eye. They're the favorite with Louisa and EC Glass lurking behind them with multiple scholarship kids and a chance to be, 8-2, 9-1, dare we say with a break or two, 10-0 in position to get that number 1 seed out of 4D.
Yeah. Well, in Division 3, Phoebus is a returning champion. I believe they upset Liberty Christian last year, who I think had won, was undefeated, or at least they were blowing teams out for most of the year. Is Phoebus going to be strong this year? And what's your prediction for the division?
Phoebus might take umbrage, I don't take umbrage with what you said, but they might take umbrage with what we would think, Julian, which was an upset, because they felt very confident going into that game. I watched Liberty Christian. I thought they were a touchdown or two better, and turnovers cost LCA in that game despite having an absolute monster on the line in Zach Rice, who's at North Carolina, and one of the best two-way players in the entire state, and Dylan Stowers, who's up at Army now playing his college football. But I feel like Phoebus is better than last year. I talked about Stonebridge's defense being better. Phoebus's might be as well, led by Michael McMullen in the trenches, who's headed to James Madison. Their defensive backfield's very, very good with Jordan Bass, who's a long, lanky 6'3", 6'4" safety who will come up and rock you. He'll knock your socks off. He's going to go to either like Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech. He's got a list of Power 5 schools. He's got his decision on tap, I think, in early September. And their linebackers were pretty young last year, so they're going to be a little bit more experienced this season. The offensive weaponry is there with Bass and a bunch of skilled receivers. Nolan James comes in from Nansemond River at quarterback as a dual threat, and their running back who can easily run for 1,200 to 1,500 yards, and Ty Taylor returns. Who beats them is a big question, because of all 6 divisions, I've gone on record saying, and I'll say it to you now, I think Phoebus is the heaviest favorite of all 6. Mm-hmm. Not saying they're the best team in the entire state of all 6 classifications, but I think the gap between them and the next team is the biggest this year, which some thought it might have been Liberty Christian that was the case. Now, Liberty Christian's lost a lot of seniors, but Coach Rocco has a sophomore running back in Gideon Davidson. Julian, if you haven't watched this kid's highlight tape, any kid that we talked about, go pull up some clips from the news channel out west, his benefit game or his scrimmage with Appomattox. Unbelievably impressive, just breathtaking, his running ability. And he was a 1,000-yard, 1,200-yard running back as a freshman last year. He's got offers already from West Coast schools like Oregon and Southern Cal and places like that. So he is a beast of a back. might be the best 10th grade running back in the entire state. And they're going to be in the hunt. That Seminole district is the best district in Class 3 and maybe in the whole state, with Brookville and Heritage of Lynchburg. EC Glass was a Division 4 school, so they all beat up on each other. They have some great games. It's kind of like the Concord has been for years up north. So they have some great battles. And out of Tidewater and Richmond, two teams that will try to give Phoebus a run for their money. Hopewell, who's beaten them before in the playoffs, has won 2 state championships recently under Coach Ricky Irby, and Lake Taylor. Hank Sawyer's no newbie to this. He's won 3 state championships. He's been in 6 of them. He's undefeated in the state semifinal round, and he's got his running back returning in Terrion Washington Jacobs, the Eastern District Offensive Player of the Year. He's breaking in 2 new quarterbacks, but he has the luxury of having a 6'7" wide receiver who can make one-handed snags named Elijah Washington, a.k.a. Moss, on his side. So throw the ball up to him. He'll make something happen. Got an offensive lineman going to UBA and Anthony Britton. The Titans should be back after a down 6-5 year and be in the hunt to maybe see Phoebus, possibly give him a scare come November.
Wow. I'd be excited. I want to see that guy on the basketball court too. If he's 6'7".
He's good.
Okay.
Listen, I watched him at Norfolk State team camp. He had 7 blocks in a game.
Yeah, he's sounds like he'd be a monster out there.
Yeah.
Let's go to Division 2. Now, the 757 does the 804 claim King William? Because it's kind of like in the middle.
If they win, they both claim them.
Okay, exactly. Yeah.
But I will say most of their coverage comes from the 804 folks. So I think they're more technically 804 area code, and their coach has had some, I'm not sure what it's, some personal stuff that's going on. So he hasn't been there all the time, Scott Moore, but they lost the best player I thought was going to get the Gatorade Player of the Year in Damon Claiborne. I think he had like 53 touchdowns last year to Wake Forest. Their quarterback, Javion Robinson, I believe they graduated 14 seniors. I put them low in my top 10 at like 8 or 9 in Class 2. So they're going to have a hard time repeating. And of all 6 divisions that we're talking about, that one is the most wide open. Okay. If someone said, which one do you feel least confident in your number 1 pick, taking nothing away from the team that it'll be revealed here in the next 24, 48 hours, it's Class 2, because I think there's some teams in the conversation with Ridgeview who can throw the football, very exciting offense, Graham, who's had some big linemen and some speedsters at the running back spot, and even Appomattox, who's won 340 state titles recently, Jonathan Penix, who's a dynamic athlete, all 3 phases, Tavorian Copeland, who's headed to Virginia Tech. There's a question or two about each of them, and they're all kind of on equal footing. So those playoff games could be the most compelling and competitive as we get towards state semifinal, state championship round this year, whereas King Williams has had that one dynamite player. I don't see that just one dynamite takeover player in Class 2, so I think it's going to be pretty topsy-turvy in Division 2 come playoff time. A lot of good teams, some interesting storylines, but there's not one that I say, all right, that's your Highland Springs, that's your Stonebridge, that's your Phoebus, that's your Oscar Smith. I think it's going to be pretty balanced throughout.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Division 1. And you've already touched on Riverhead and their winning streak. Have they scheduled some games against teams from higher divisions? And do you also predict them to repeat again?
I do, because if you don't, I just think you're foolish at this point, because they haven't lost, I think, in a state finals. My year could be wrong here, so forgive me, Riverheads fans, if I get this incorrect. I think it's like 2015 when Galax beat them. It's often been the Riverheads versus Galax Invitational in Division 1. Their first game out of the gate, though, if you're looking for a storyline here the next day or so, Waynesboro, the Little Giants, which is like the movie, The Little Giants. You love it. They've had a turnaround reminiscent to what I mentioned with Kempsville in Virginia Beach. They were very bad for a long time. Coach Jarvis has them on the upswing in their Division 3 school. So if you're looking for a shocker to snap the streak, first game for a new coach, so he's been a long-time assistant in Coach Norcross, Waynesboro's coming into this game hosting it. They're not afraid of Riverheads, and they're trying to make some history here and grab some statewide attention. So it's a couple dangerous spots for them. I think deeper in the schedule, I mentioned Lower Botetourt game 3 is that's the game to go get the streak should they be 2-0, and that's going to be a pressurized spot because Lower Botetourt wants to get some payback, and they can be physical. They got a quarterback that ran for 1,800 yards, and Jakari nicely does Botetourt. And if their defense is better in terms of tackling and coverage, particularly tackling when it comes to Riverheads with their running attack, then that will be a more competitive, tighter ball game where Botetourt could actually beat them. But at the end of the schedule, Stewart's Draft, who's been in 2 state championship games in the last 3 years, on November the 4th. is one to circle. And that's a game to circle because I think it's going to be a barometer for both Stewart's Draft and Riverheads as they go into the playoff chase to try to repeat. I mentioned about dynamic players, Julian. Class 1 has them because you have the two kids we mentioned about the prospects. You have Robinson at Essex. You have Selden at Northumberland. You've also got a young man at Grundy and Ian Scammell, who's ran for 2,000 yards. He's returning. So there's some individual studs in the Division 1 field this year that should they get a chance to see a Riverheads or Riverheads get picked off, they could carry their team through. And I think it's more likely to happen at the smaller level than at the bigger level where you have that one individual dynamite player who puts his team on his back.
That's interesting because like Grundy, the Appalachian part of the state is more known for the wrestling and basketball than they're known for football. So it'd be interesting to see how Grundy can do.
Well, and they have a big hulking offensive line, so they're going to be able to block and move people out of the way for Scammell to just, go through and get those 40, 50-yard touchdown runs and continue to pile up numbers. So I think Class 1, there's a lot of teams I looked at and I was like, they're pretty good. So I think the gap is shrinking for Riverheads, which is not a knock on Riverheads, who's got Caden Cook Cash, by the way. He's sitting there going, what's this Hatfield guy talking about? I'm the best player in the state. I can run for 2,000 yards. I get the touches, and I'm going to shut them all up. So the bottom line is that it's shrinking because maybe not Riverheads is getting worse. Some teams are getting better to challenge them. And people are getting up for Riverheads because they now have a name. They now have this streak. And I think it makes for some interesting fodder and talk and some games that we'll see play out.
Oh, that'd be exciting. Well, look, Matthew, as always, this has been great. Hey, what time is your radio show on Saturdays?
10 a.m. to 12 noon. Give it a listen. It's online, ESPN Radio 941.com. If you ever miss it, it's up on the podcast page. So tune in.
Yeah, I'll also put it in the notes on here. Also subscribe to Virginia Preps. They've been putting out great content for many, many years. Just a superior publication. They do a lot for sports, a lot for coaches, exposure for these kids. Really appreciate what you do, Matt. And maybe we'll get together in the playoffs and you can preview the playoffs for us.
Hey, that'll be a great thing to do. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Have a great day now.
You too, Julian. Be well.
All right. You too, man.